You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I will be your podcast host for today. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode number 57 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. Today, I'm happy to be sharing part 2 of the quarterly SAA and COSA speaker meeting. And again, this one happened at the beginning of May 2022. This week, the featured guest will be John R. from SAA. And like I had mentioned last week, John recently moved to Southern California from the Bay Area, and I remember seeing him at many retreats over the years, and last year at our online retreat, I remember being at a workshop that he was leading around spirituality, which was really great. In addition to that workshop, John was also part of the talent show. And John mentions in his share that he is a dancer. I can remember before the talent show running through sound options, trying to get the best sound that we could for his music on Zoom, for him to be able to hear it while he dances and yet have the music project over Zoom. I was grateful to be able to help out with that. And just thinking about our talent show, I'm excited that this summer a couple of us are getting together to play some music at a friend's house in the Bay Area, and we'll be announcing that soon on the Bay Area SAA website as an Outer Circle event, and that will be in July. So I'm really looking forward to that. As I got to hear John's message at the speaker meeting, he covered a lot of what it was like before getting into program, and then once getting into program, covering all 12 steps in his share and focusing on step 12 and carrying the message to other suffering sex addicts. What he had to say about that prompted me to choose a reading from Answers in the Heart, and this is from January 21st. Starting off with a quote, "We seek God until He finds us." Madeleine L'Engle. And I know her from A Wrinkle in Time. Cool. The day comes when we suddenly realize we are not caught up in our addiction. That's the moment we know we're living in recovery, when we're practicing the principles of recovery in all areas of our lives. This awakening can come suddenly as the result of a crisis, or it can happen subtly over time. It always brings with it a deepening of our commitment to the 12-step program. We find ourselves turning away from the addiction and toward our higher power. We find the joy of living in God's will. Working the 12 steps frees us from the tyranny of sex addiction by giving us the awareness that God has removed the addiction because we've let go of it. These things are restored to the proper order. The addiction is outside of us. We have ourselves and our relationship with our higher power. It's then we can reach out to other sex addicts because we finally have someone to give them, ourselves. And the meditation at the end, I am not my addiction. My addiction is not my higher power. And again, I chose that because of what he had to share on step 12 and showing up for other suffering sex addicts and carrying his message of recovery. By sharing that at the speaker meeting and sharing it here on the podcast, it is really helping carry that message. So I'm grateful for John mentioning that in his share. And that's about all I have here at the beginning. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the speaker meeting. Unfortunately, when they were recording this, we got a little bit of it cut off at the beginning and end. So without further ado, here it is. I hope you enjoy it.
All right. Our second speaker for tonight is John R. from Palm Desert, I believe. He will be introduced by Ken B. Ken?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. My name is Ken B., and I'm a sex addict.
Thank you, Ken. It's great to be here, and thank you, Sarah. I really enjoyed hearing your words, your experience, strength, and hope. I will share what it was like, what happened, and what it is like today. I can start with, having moved every single year. I was a military child, moved from city to city, and was pulled out of school in the middle of the year and would try to adjust to the best of my ability. I was extremely introverted and shy. At age 13, my father was diagnosed with ALS. He passed away when I was 16. I was his caretaker. I became an instant father to my brother. I became an instant husband to my mother. And that has shaped much of who I am today. At age 8, I was in a locker room with my father. He played softball in the military. And that's when I knew that I was gay. I didn't know what gay meant then, but I knew that I was attracted. I was looking at the men in a way that was, as I look back, demonstrative of my sexual orientation. I was raised devout Catholic, so was told by my father at age 14 to never masturbate, never to touch myself because it was a sin. I was steeped in shame and guilt from a very early age. And when I hit puberty, my sexual orientation was a huge conflict within me. I attempted to enter the seminary so that I would not have to deal with my sexual orientation. I wasn't sexual with anyone. I was with myself, and I was filled with shame and guilt each time I would do that. I explored somewhat sex with both genders in my early 20s. And upon coming out of college, I'm a professional dancer. And I had a student, and we fell in love. And she and I were married in 1984. And we have an adult daughter who was born in 1987. 2 years into the marriage, I started having an affair with a man and had that affair throughout the marriage of 10 years. I left the marriage and I fell in love for what I say for the first time. I loved my ex-wife, but I didn't know what same-sex love felt like until I fell in love with my then partner. It was during that time with him, about 2 years into our relationship, that I, with his assistance, admitted that I had some sexual stuff going on that wasn't really healthy. And he said, "Oh, there's a program for this called Sex Addicts Anonymous." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I went to my first meeting in 1998 in San Francisco. I lived about 60 miles north of San Francisco. And for the next 10 years, did not have a sponsor. I did not work the steps. I went to meetings once a week down in San Francisco. My partner and I had a monogamous relationship, and I had no issue with that at all. On my 45th birthday, he decided to get a third person, a third man for the two of us. And something happened with my sexual addiction. It magnified by 1,000%. I had never been with another person. I had just done things that involved my own sexuality and my partner's sexuality. So I started exploring anonymous sex, and that led to the end of my relationship with my then partner. And that was in 2005. I can clearly see that the addiction, I had always heard in the meetings I went to over the 10 years, that this disease progresses. You may do things that you never thought you would do. People saying, I've done things now and I'm doing things now that I never thought I would do. I thought, poor souls. And here I was doing things that I never thought I would do and experiencing situations that I had gotten myself into, dangerous situations where my life was at danger. And that I was in those situations of my own accord. And I would go to the meetings once a week and I would say, I'm a newcomer. I did this, I'm still acting out. And the most I ever had was 6 months of sobriety. At the root of my addiction was this underlying anxiety and depression that had manifested in my childhood and in my adolescence. And it had never been addressed. And what I was doing was medicating the pain that was always there. When I was with someone else, the pain would go away. And then when they would leave or I would leave, it would crash back in, multiplied by 100. Then I would find someone else to medicate that. I was destroying my life before my very eyes. In 2006, I went in for my STD testing and I was diagnosed with HIV. I was alone. I had no one to tell. It was filled with a stigma. It was so stigmatized and it was so dark. And how could I let that happen to myself? I then, a month later, am diagnosed with another STD that my body is still host to. So my body is host to 2 viruses that I don't dwell on by any means, and they are ever present, and they are a reminder of why I am here. I continued acting out sexually because now the pain that I had been carrying, the depression, was so intense that all I could do was anesthetize it with more and more anonymous sex. I did this for 2 years. And on August 1st of 2008, I stepped into recovery. All I can say is I knew that I had hit a spiritual bottom, that I was so broken that I didn't want to live anymore. And I remember saying, gosh, I'm so glad I'm alive in a time when 12-step is available, because I don't know where I would have turned had I not had SAA. And I went to a meeting, a camp out in August 1st of 2008 up in the Sierras. And it was there that I immersed myself in recovery. Did a lot of crying, a lot of walking, a lot of talking, a lot of meetings. And I found a sponsor. And as I look back to that period of time, as I said in my first step, I was a hound dog that was put out on a trail and had a scent and followed that scent as if its life depended upon it. Recovery for me was all I could think about, eat, drink. All I could do was recovery. I knew that I had found the right place to address my spiritual malady, and I immersed myself in it. I call the steps a blueprint for successful living, because the steps are what gave me what I have today. And I will jump ahead for a moment what I have today. I have a monogamous, incredibly loving relationship of 13 years with my husband. I have a beautiful relationship, an honest and healed relationship with my daughter, who is an alcoholic, who I must do my own work to support her the best way I can. If it weren't for my sobriety, I would not be able to do that. 6 months ago, I was diagnosed with PTSD, and I'm experiencing trauma on a daily basis and doing everything I can to keep my head above water. And I'm so grateful to Naomi Judd for talking about her depression and her mental illness and all that's coming out about her life, because I talk honestly about the viruses I have and the road I went down and what I had to hit. So if I can help one man not go down that road, or let him know that he's not alone, I've done my job. And if I can say to anybody who's suffering from depression, PTSD, anxiety, you are not alone at all. There are millions of us who are hurting in such a deep way, and you're not alone. And the fact that I'm sober today from my compulsive sexual behavior, I now have 13 years of sobriety. I have that because I don't medicate the pain. And somehow I managed to live with it and be alive and vital. Step one is all about the problem. Step one is where I laid it all out. The moment I left step one and stepped into step two, the word that's there for me in step two is hope. I had hope for the first time I can remember in my life. I had hope. Step three, for me, there were two words: salvation and humility. I had denied my religion from the time my father died when I was 16, and I didn't find it again until I did step three. And I found a goddess that I adore and that she adores me. And I have a deep, intimate relationship with her on a daily, moment-to-moment basis. My sponsor at the beginning of our relationship in August of 2008 said, "You have to adhere to these conditions in order for me to sponsor you, one of which you must do a minimum of 4 meetings per week." There were only 2 meetings where I was living. And with my schedule, I could not do more. So the third one was an AA meeting. And I started my own meeting in one of the towns in our community for the 4th meeting. That's how committed I was, the hound that could not take its nose off the scent. I knew what I wanted, and I knew, more importantly, what I needed in order to heal and to survive. And I did that meeting for 1 year. Then regular meetings were starting more in Sonoma County, so I was able to get to them and fulfill my 4 meetings a week. When I got to step 4, the 2 words I have are cathartic and bonding. The cathartic is self-explanatory. The bonding was the work that I was doing with my sponsor and with the goddess of my understanding, because she was right there with me, and I was bonding with her in a way that I could not have imagined. Step 5 for me was the deepest bonding I had ever experienced, because I told my sponsor things that I had never told anyone else ever. And he listened to me and said, "Thank you, John, I love you." And the bond is still there. It was phenomenal. Step 6 was like step 2. Step 6 was hope. Maybe I can get rid of these things that block me from being the man that I truly want to be. Step 7 was like 3. It was a huge spiritual awakening for me. My sponsor then took me up to Mount Davidson in San Francisco, and he said, help me make a stone circle big enough for you to step into. And he said, I want you to think of all of that which has not served you since you can remember. The tapes that keep playing, the behaviors that keep unfolding. I want you to feel those within you. I want you now to take a deep breath, and as you exhale, step into the sacred circle where all of that is released to the goddess of your understanding. And I'll never forget the feeling. I fell to my knees. I was in a fetal position on the ground, weeping, feeling redeemed. It was redemption. I truly had a spiritual awakening. Step 8 was where the repair began. My personal repair had begun long before. But here now, in step 8, I was repairing damage that I had done. And it's that day that I realized that I will stay sober one day at a time as an amend to the men that I harmed. It was then at step 8 that I also realized that I had to forgive myself first for the harm that I had done to others and that I had done to myself. Because it wasn't until I could forgive myself that I could forgive anyone else for what they had done to me. And the words that I say to this day, John, you were doing the best you could do. John, you're doing the best you can do right now. And when people do me harm, if they do today, I'm realizing that they're doing the best they can do also. They're not intending to harm me, and I'm not intending to harm them. It's my unconsciousness that causes me to do harm if I do it to myself or others. Step 9 was courage. I had had so many anonymous partners that I didn't know how I would ever contact them to let them know that I was sorry for what had happened. And the county had an anonymous notification system where if I just supplied the emails, they could tell the individuals that they had had sex with someone who had an STD and they should probably go get checked. All those that I could make contact with, I did. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Step 10, just when I thought I had it, now a deeper understanding. Step 10 began for me the maintenance, that I had to build up my worth, my value, and heal enough that I was worth spiritual maintenance, and that I can't have a resentment today. I can't hold it. It feels like something's growing in my body that is not of healthy to me. And I have to address it, either by doing a step 4 amend or going to the person and making the amend. I can't hold on to it. My fears, if I hold on to fears, it's really hard with my depression and PTSD not to hold on to fears. And I have daily conversations with the God of my understanding, begging her to take them. Fortunately, I don't do any sexual harms anymore, so I don't have to do anything with those. Remember, these for me are a blueprint for successful living. My background is in science, and I want to see it laid out. I want to see the experiment. I want to see how it works out. I look at these as an experiment, and I see the result. Step 11 for me was deep spiritual maturation. I will never get as deeply conscious or connected to the goddess of my understanding as I want to be. I have to keep it going on a daily basis. I have to strengthen it every single day. Step 12 is what this is all about. When I was asked to speak, my first reaction was no. I'm hurting way too much to speak about hope. And something bigger than me said, oh no, this is the last step of the blueprint. And you need to be there for people. And you need to most of all be there for you. Thank you for listening. I'm John. I'm a sex addict.
Again, many thanks to John for sharing with us. And yeah, I was so bummed they cut off the recording. They did kind of a similar thing where we all got to unmute and thank John personally, the big crowd of voices. And I was hoping that we could catch that here on the recording, but apparently it got cut off before then. So anyway, I really appreciate John for helping carry the message to anyone listening to this podcast and anyone that was at the quarterly speaker meeting. Here at the end of this episode, I wanted to play a little bit of music and read some feedback. When John was sharing, this was just after the sad passing of Naomi Judd. He did mention that in his share. And so I wanted to share some of the music of the Judds. In my collection, I have a couple of songs from Winona, but I do not have a lot of music from the Judds. So doing some research online, I found a song that they just performed in, I think, April of 2022. And I think this was Naomi's last performance. It was very heart-touching hearing Winona sing and the gospel singers that they had in the background. But just seeing Naomi, you can see that she was checked out mentally, and it was sad, but it's such a beautiful song. And this is the Judds performing "Love Can Build a Bridge" at the 2022 Country Music Awards.
I would give my heart's desire so that you might see. The first step is to realize that it all begins with you and me. Love can build a bridge between your heart and mine. Love can build a bridge. Don't you think it's time? Don't you think it's time?
Yeah, like I mentioned, really, really beautiful song, very uplifting, and I'll probably add this to my spiritual mix. And like I mentioned, I don't have a lot of music from the Judds, so if there are any people out there listening that know of other songs that I should be checking out by them, by all means, you can let me know by writing to me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. And just thinking of that and the feedback emails, we did receive a couple of emails, and one talked about music and the other one was a very, very long and in-depth and deep email that I will not be reading the whole thing, but I did want to read part of it and respond to it. It was very deep and touching. The first one comes from Adam, and he wrote, "Last week, I stumbled upon your podcast a few weeks ago, and I'm working backwards through the episodes. I'm on the music one today, and when you mentioned Tool, I had to write. A friend of mine and I started a Tool cover band at the beginning of the pandemic, and we're loving it. I'm on bass, and he's on guitar. As a lifelong metalhead, I thank you so much for that episode. As for me, I'm struggling with multiple obsessions. I've been in AA for 13 years, 9 sober with a slip, and have 1,417 days as of today." Super awesome. Food, porn, TV, ogling, voyeurism. And I have been listening to OA and AA podcasts and came across your SAA podcast and can relate. I actually bought the Green Book a year ago and the daily meditation reader, and that is called Voices of Recovery, but threw them away for fear of my wife finding them, or anyone else for that matter. I've been porn-free for 7 days now, but allow once a day self-pleasure. and have only had one day where there were multiple sessions. I wrote the circles, but have not attended nor searched for meetings for either OA or SAA. Embarrassed, really. So thanks for the podcast and for infusing metal into the conversation. A pipeline to God. I love it. And I did write back to him, and we'll be giving him links to some of the Zoom meetings that I attend and others that may be a good fit for him if he so chooses to join a meeting. But yeah, when he mentioned that he was in a Tool cover band, he gave a link, and I got to listen, and it was a fantastic instrumental version of a Tool song called Stinkfist. That song really covers what it's like being an addict or being someone that just nothing is ever enough, always wanting more. I wanted to read some of the lyrics. The chorus is just not enough. I need more. Nothing seems to satisfy. I said, I don't want it. I just need it to breathe, to feel, to know I'm alive. And another part of the song, something kind of sad about the way things have come to be, desensitized to everything, what became of subtlety. How can this mean anything to me if I don't really feel anything at all? And yeah, being in the depths of addiction, I really, really feel that and connect with the song in that way. Yeah, so anyway, here is a little bit of Adam's cover band playing some Tool. So cool. I love it. And I really keyed in on the second verse here where the guitarist is playing what Adam Jones plays live. It is not on the studio version in this way. And this is the way that I choose to play it as well. It's a very fun way to kind of change things up. And so, yeah, when I heard him playing that, I'm just like, yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I too have been in a couple of different online collaborations, people that I found over Facebook during the quarantine and even one before then. And I wanted to play a little bit of one of those, and I'm not sure what song I'm going to play. So I'll make this kind of generic and be surprised when I drop in the song post-production.
But away the dagger, but tonight
So yeah, anyway, I have a lot of fun being able to play the music of Tool with other people around the world, connecting through social media and finding other fans and linking our videos together to make a cohesive song has been a fun outer circle project for me over the past couple of years. At the beginning of this episode, I did mention that we are doing a music outer circle event, and like usual, I'll be playing some Tool. This is over at a program friend's house where he's got this amazing sound system in his garage. And I did go over there last summer and played for an hour. And it was so much fun. But this one will be hopefully involving more people getting together and playing some music and having some good fun fellowship. So with all that being said, I really wanted to turn to this next email. And again, this one was really lengthy. The title is New Listener Long-Winded Question. And so I'm going to be picking out just a couple of parts, and I have all intentions to respond directly to this woman. But yeah, I sat down last week after getting this email and reading through this and just being floored. Some of it was a bit triggering for me, and I got to talk about it at a meeting. So yeah, I am going to read like the first paragraph and a half, and then I'll skip down towards the end. There's a lot of personal stuff in here that doesn't need to be here on the podcast. But it says, "Hey, thanks for the podcast. Listened to a few of them today. I just wanted to tell my story to someone because I've been really struggling lately, and the thoughts can be really hard to organize. I'm not in SLAA, which is Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, a different program than SAA, but I have considered it since I was a teenager. There's not a lot of IRL meetings near me in real life or in person, face-to-face, and the Zoom meetings are something I'm trying to get comfortable with joining one. I was an addict since about 7 years old. I knew it since I was 12. I shared it for the first time at 16, and now I am 23. I've been trying to transmute resentment for the culture and the impact of the internet on my generation my whole life. I studied psychology in my undergraduate and put a lot of time into human sexuality courses. It's been a topic I've been concerned with since I realized there was something going on when I was 12. I have a theory about generational specific type of parental neglect, namely internet monitoring neglect, that was pervasive in the early 2000s. There's a lot to be said about it. However, in simple terms, I think the phenomena impacted my whole generation to various extents, simply because of the rise of the internet with our development and the simple fact that we could navigate technology much better than our parents. They didn't understand it. Mine did not want to understand it, so they didn't attempt to monitor me, clueless to the fact that we all found chat rooms as literal children. The naivete of my mother's perspective of the internet still deeply hurts me. I know I will have to tell her about the abuse to heal, but it will shake her worldview and self-perception as a mother so badly, and I don't know what will happen. My mom was great. My dad was emotionally unstable, but still present and loving. But when it came to my internet use, I was neglected, and it's not their fault. They didn't know that the danger even existed. I became obsessed with camming on chat sites from 7 years old. Thousands of men would be with me at the same time, and I would get so many messages that it flooded me with dopamine and approval. I would hide this from my mom and get very anxious flashes of shame whenever I thought she had figured it out and was going to bring it up, a feeling that I unconsciously replicate when I cheat on my partners. I knew it was kind of bad from the beginning. I knew I needed to hide it, but it was such a rush. My childhood brain didn't have the brakes to stop it. I had been completely convinced by thousands of men that I was mature. Not only that, but that I was worth risking their families for. They would tell me that I was better than their wives. I had grown men present me with elite dirty talk every fucking day of my childhood. It makes it really difficult to hold long-term attraction and desire in a relationship now. The older I got, the more the views dropped, and so the behavior tapered off after I turned 18. It's fucked up, but once I was legal, it was less exciting. Mostly because by that point I had a much more developed understanding and I started to take control back. I think this fact alone has fucked with me the most. I have a deep fear that all men are pedophiles, that it will be hidden from me, that all men are hiding these things. I'm going to stop there. From there, it goes on to a lot of personal stuff, more about specifics around her current life and family relationships and dynamics. But yeah, anyway, just the beginning of this email really hit me hard. Just knowing that, I was never on chat sites, but I have seen photos and videos from underage girls on these sites. And just knowing that I am an abuser in this situation. Just hearing it from the vantage point of someone who went through this type of abuse really hit hard. When working my steps this past year, looking at my 9th step amends, I took a look at what I could do to help carry the message to people that have been abused in this sort of way, that I have been part of the cause by my acting out in that way. And so I will do my best to make my amends by reaching out to this person and seeing that she can get the help that she needs if she wants it. But yeah, it did trigger me to read this, and I was grateful that I had my home meeting the night that I read this, and so I was able to go to my meeting and talk about it and just kind of let that out there and not harbor any of that. And yeah, I wanted to wrap up the bottom of the email. It says, this is all over the place and I'm sorry about that, but thank you so much for taking the time to read my story. I find it incredibly difficult to find any resources discussing similar situations to mine with the childhood chat site grooming, so I think I need to start my own dialogue about it. And I think by reading it here on the podcast, that has started some dialogue around that. If you ever so choose to be a guest on the podcast, you have a spot here available in carrying the message to other people who've suffered through this as you have. So yeah, I am super grateful for you reaching out and writing this. And like I said, I'll be reaching out to you individually to answer some of the more personal questions. And it is signed S. So S, again, thank you so much for sharing your experience. As I'm editing this episode and dropping this in as part of the post-production, there were a couple things that I wanted to mention about this email that I didn't get to. Yeah, the first was in terms of childhood neglect. One of the things that I've mentioned here on the podcast that I've been doing with my son when he was about 9, I started reading from a book called It's Perfectly Normal. And it talked a lot about puberty and biology, the spectrum of sexuality and gender identity, masturbation, and it also had a section on internet safety. And is a fantastic way for parents to talk to children about online safety, and is definitely something that was needed for me to be able to approach the subject with my son and make sure that we're aware as parents what's going on with him, and he's aware as a child what kind of dangers are out there. So I was really grateful to find that book, and I'll put that link in the show notes. And again, that's something that I've used in my personal life, and it has nothing to do with the program of SAA. The other thing that I did want to mention is, without getting into the specifics of it, but in the second half of the body of the email, there were lots of questions around working through issues through fantasy and her current sexual relationship with her boyfriend. And it is definitely something that happens to a lot of abuse victims, that they fantasize about things that were traumatizing to them. I've heard it mentioned in other podcasts and other readings that I've done that it is a way of kind of taking that control back. And I will be writing more about my personal experience, which I don't wish to share here on the podcast. I did want to mention that if you have gone through a sexual traumatic event in your life, in your childhood, that thinking about these things, recontextualizing it through fantasy happens to a lot of people, and it is not uncommon. So be aware of that, and you are not alone. So if you have a need to reach out and share with us here at the podcast, you can reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. You can also reach me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com if you want to be a guest on the podcast or have any questions for me personally. This episode's been an emotional roller coaster for me. I love sharing the music. I love being able to share the message with other suffering sex addicts and reading the feedback that we get. I have quite a few episodes lined up here over the next couple of weeks, so I'm really, really grateful for that. And I hope you'll be tuning in for those. And I thank you so much for tuning into this one. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.